Good morning. So I'm the last of 3 days, right? Is that good or bad? I don't know, right? Well, I guess we'll see. So as Fraser mentioned, I want this to be interactive. So you guys have been talked at a lot probably for the last couple of days, and I want to make sure that I'm pulling some things out of you because if we're going to talk about becoming a person of influence, that has to start inside us. And so I've got very few slides, and most of them just have a picture on them. So this is all about pulling out of you what you need to become a person of influence and why I believe it's important for you to work on that. So the very first thing I'd like you to do is in your notes there, I want you to jot down the name of someone who's been a big influence on you. In any facet of your life, doesn't matter, but jot down someone who's been a big influence on you. And we're going to come back to that person in a little bit. But it can be business, can be personal, faith tradition, you name it. We good? So, yeah, everyone got that in their mind? We even got a new pen. Look at that. New pen. Okay. So the next question that I have, and just keep that person in mind for right now. The next question that I have is, who do you influence? And more importantly, why do you want to influence them? So some of the obvious answers are probably, well, I like to influence my employees. Maybe if you're a parent, you want to influence your children. Anyone in here in sales and marketing have that as a role? Okay, because obviously those are influencers, right? So who do you influence right now? And this is where you can answer. Who do you influence?
My staff.
Okay, your staff. Okay, in what ways do you influence them?
I try to be a good role model.
Okay, good.
And I try to teach them the proper way to do their job and engage with our patients.
Okay, all right, I like it. Who else do you influence?
Children.
Children. Okay, in what way?
Whether it's setting an example of a work ethic or
Okay.
how you treat family members or pretty much every way.
Okay, all right. Try and keep them on the straight and narrow if we can, right? Who else do you influence?
We probably influence our patients to a certain extent.
Okay, how so?
Letting them know we care about their services and
Okay,
their bill, or
okay.
the fact that they're upset about something they
Okay.
shouldn't be upset about.
But you want to come back to your practice should they or someone they know need your services, right? So absolutely. Okay. And have you involved with, I don't know, coaching a sport team, being a scout leader, a band leader, anything like that?
Coaching a softball team.
There you go, right? So you got a whole softball team that you're attempting to influence. So how many people do you think the average person influences in their lifetime? Average person, just folks just like you and me. 100, okay?
That's what I was going to say, too.
Another vote for 100. It's higher.
I was going to say 500.
500, okay? Still higher.
Well, isn't it potentially everybody you come in contact with?
Potentially, okay? Most sociologists argue that the average person, so not even someone who's, say, in a role of public domain of being a leader, just average folks influence 15,000 people in the course of their lifetime. It's crazy, right? It's crazy. And that most of us influence on average 4 people a day. So when you start to think about that for a minute, like I saw your face, you're like, whoa, right? It's kind of an awesome responsibility when you think about it. That if I'm touching that many lives over the course of my life, what's that ripple effect? That's really what we're talking about. And so as practice leaders, when I hear you say, yes, I influence my staff and I influence our patients, obviously, those are key things, and that can have ripple effects. And so that's why we want to talk about influence as a part of your leadership skill set and why it's so critical that you work on being a person of influence in your practices. So I want you to go ahead. We're going to draw a little bit. Can you guys get on your paper there, draw a circle, label it like the compass I've got up here, and put a dot right in the center for me. Neatness does not count. What do you think the dot in the middle of this is? Us, very good. You guys are awake on a Saturday morning. I love it. It's you. The very first person that we have to influence is ourselves. Okay? We do that through what we call self-leadership. Now, what self-leadership means, I want you to think about this. Think about the last time someone let you down. Whether it was, you know, in your personal relationship, business relationship, someone let you down. They promised they were going to do something and they let you down. What happened when they let you down? What happened in your mind? Disappointment, okay?
You lose trust.
Lose trust. Lose maybe some respect for them. Irritation, okay? And what does that person typically say to you about them letting you down? Okay, let's assume they do know.
I'm sorry.
They'll say, I'm sorry. What else will they say? Excuses, right? The dog ate my homework kind of thing, right? They'll tell us, oh, I didn't get it done because of this, or it was this, or whatever, I couldn't, da, 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 okay? And we get perturbed at that because they promised they were going to do something. Now, think about the last time that you let someone down, right? So the shoe's on the other foot now. You've let someone down. What went on in your mind? Oh, I had something more important I had to take care of. Oh, it wasn't all that critical that get done anyway. Okay, sometimes we let ourselves off the hook for the very situations that we don't let other people off the hook. And that's what self-leadership is all about. Do we hold ourselves to the same level of competence, of integrity that we expect of our staff or the people within our lives, right? So it all starts with us. If we can't lead ourselves well, we can't lead other people well. And so I want you to think about the things that you need to work on as a leader. And are they things that you're asking your staff to also work on, right? Because as leaders, they're looking at us and saying, well, gosh, if she's not working on it, why should I? And so do we have a plan for our own growth is really what it comes down to. And so what I love about speaking for so many of the AAOE chapters, and even I'm headed to the national conference this year, is that there's always a nice mix for attendees of the technical things that you guys need to run your practices, along with the personal development piece. And that personal development piece is so key for us in leadership roles. And sometimes we forget that. We get so caught up in managing the numbers, and of course we're in the middle of a pandemic, and managing all that's been going on with that, and growing our practice, those kind of hard skill things, if you will, that we forget about, okay, what am I doing for me? And I know for me, that hit a couple years ago. I realized that I do so much training and so much development for my clients. I thought, gosh, Ed, when's the last time, other than going to HR-related conferences, you know, like this, when's the last time I really did something for me? And yet here I am preaching that my clients need to develop their people, and what am I doing to develop me? And I realized that was a big gap for me. So everything starts, if we're going to develop our staffs, or we're going to develop our practices, we've got to make sure we're developing us and leading ourselves well. Okay, next thing I want you to do, draw a line going down south. What do you think this line represents?
Failures?
I'm sorry?
Failures?
No, we're not going to talk about failures today.
Well, going south usually means
It does, yes. We don't want to see our revenue line going south, right? That's never a good thing, right? We don't want to see our patient count going down. Yeah, we don't want to see that. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, okay? We call this positional leadership. So we're in our role, and let's say we're new to our role, okay? Our people will give us a short period of time, just based on our position, to figure out whether they want to follow us. And for those of you that have been in your positions for a while, a new employee coming in will look at your position and say, okay, I'm going to give them a certain period of time to determine whether I want to follow them. Okay, so positional leadership only gets us so far. Why do you think that's the case? Why does that title only get us so far? Okay, so prove yourself by the example that you're leading for your staff, okay? Should people follow you because of your title? Why not? It's just a title, right? Look at that person that I asked you to write down a few minutes ago. How many of you wrote down someone who's a family member? Half, okay? How many of you wrote down someone who was like a teacher, maybe in a school type? Okay, one. Someone from your faith tradition. A boss or a mentor from the business world, okay? So predominantly, over half of you wrote down someone who had no title, right? So when we think about influence, and we're going to talk about title in a few minutes, but it's not about our titles. Give me someone who was an extremely influential leader in world history. Florence Nightingale, okay? And why was she such an influencer?
She set the tone for nursing.
Okay, right? Modern day nursing based on some of her work, right? Maybe somebody else. I'll have to remember that one. That's a good one. You want me to give you one? Hitler. Was Hitler an influential leader? Yup. People argue, oh, but Ed, you can't say that. He wasn't a leader. Why not? Did he have followers? Did those followers believe in what his crazy vision was? Yep. Were they fully committed to him? Yep. Well, okay. Is that not what we want of our people? To believe in our vision, to follow us, and be fully committed to us? Okay? Now, we get into what he did with that is a completely different story, right? So the reason I talk about this from a positional standpoint is that it's an awesome responsibility for us. We can create something really good with the position that we have, or we can do some really bad things with the position that we have. And so the fact that we're in a position, a title, is a responsibility, but it doesn't guarantee us that leadership that people are looking for, okay? And so positional leadership is fleeting. A lot of people think, well, gee, Ed, you just talked about development, and so I'm not really a leader yet, and so when I get the leadership position, then I'll take care of that stuff. It's too late at that point. It's way too late, right? We have to work on our skills now to get to that next level, okay? So positional leadership, fleeting. Okay, next line. East to west, west to east, whichever way you want to go. What do you think this represents? I'm sorry? Balance? Nope. Yeah, we're not going south. Peer leadership. This is where folks who are basically at our same level recognize that we've got something cool to say. So they've moved beyond, oh, you're in a role, I want to follow you, I want to be around you, to, oh, I kind of like what this person is doing. Now I want you to think about your work teams right now. And think about the people that you can really rely on in your practices. Maybe they've got a title and maybe they don't. But think about each level that you have. Maybe think about some of your frontline employees. How many of them are peer level influencers? Again, for good or bad. But the employees that are on their same level look to them for guidance. Either outwardly asking them for guidance or just, I'm going to watch what he does, and whatever he does, I'm going to do. because I trust him for whatever reason. We call those peer leaders, okay? And they have a lot of power in our organization. And so the question is, when you look at the teams that you're on as practice leaders, do the other people on that same level with you, sitting around that same decision table, view you as their leader? Okay? That's where the momentum starts. When people that are at the same level of us start to recognize, hey, wait a minute, there's something about this person that I can latch on to, that I want to follow, that I want to listen to, that I want to derive some information from. Now, this is where the bulk of people who are in leadership positions reside. So if you're here, this is good. This is good. We're going to see what great leaders are in a second here, but this is good. If you are influencing your peers, kudos to you. Essentially, you've made it. You got out of that positional leadership. People are starting to trust you now. Okay, last line. We're going north. And I'm going to let you off the hook. I'm not going to ask you what this is. It is leading up. How many of you are the top executive in your practice? Show of hands. Several of you. Okay. So you might say to yourself, well, gosh, Ed, how am I supposed to lead up? There's no one above me. Okay. Who do you report to?
The CEO of the company.
Ah, okay. Any of your practices doc-owned that maybe you're reporting to docs, okay, right? So we all have bosses, right? Somebody's always at the, higher up the food chain kind of thing, okay? Leading up is about developing the leaders in leadership in the people who are above us. That they now start to recognize, wow, there's something cool I can learn from this person. And it happens a lot. These people who lead up, they're the influencers. They're the folks who have figured it out. And by the end of the day, I'm going to give you the tools to help you figure that out. Because this is a rare breed right here. The leaders who can develop other leaders. It's easy for leaders to develop followers. It's harder for us to develop other leaders. Why do you think that is?
Because they don't want to hear what you have to say because they're above you.
Okay, potentially. Potentially they're above us and think they know more than us. Okay, so that's tough. Why else is it hard to multiply other leaders? So just like positional leadership, when we think about leading up and developing other leaders around us, we're typically dealing with people who maybe are a little bit more set in their ways. If they're our peers, right, or they're above us, they're probably at similar levels to us, if not higher in the food chain. And so it's harder to influence those folks to get them to see that we are a leader. So it takes a truly special person to lead up and to develop other leaders. But it's imperative. One of the biggest mistakes that I see people make is they'll say, well, I don't want to develop too many people around me because I kind of like my position. And if I develop too many people around me, they might take my job, okay? That's faulty thinking. And usually it's thinking of someone who is, there's a gnat, it's usually thinking of someone who is not very self-assured, okay? And so that's not, when we're going to talk about influence today, that's not going to be us. We are going to be very self-assured in our leadership. Okay, so I love John Maxwell. I love this quote by him. When he talks about leadership, he says that it's influence. Nothing more, nothing less. You can't be a leader without some type of influence. And when I hear this statement, something comes to mind. So back in his heyday, there was a reporter doing an article on Carnegie. And it was all about how he had built his fortune, built his businesses, and so on. And this reporter said, Mr. Carnegie, do you realize that you have 42 millionaires working for you? Now, to put this in context, in today's dollars, that would be worth about 20 million. So 42 people working for him that had a net worth of 20 million or more. Okay, that's pretty cool, right? And he said, no, I didn't know that. And the reporter said, well, where do you find these men that are millionaires to come and convince them to come work for you? And he had a very simple response. They weren't millionaires when they came to work for me. So his development of those men, and sorry ladies, obviously it was all men back then, his development of those men into the leaders in his organizations are what turned them into financial juggernauts. It was his influence over them, right? And so that to me is what this says. That if we want to be leaders, if we want to have our vision really bought into, then we have to develop our influence over other people. And we're going to look at how. So when we think about this positional thing, right? Influence is not about position. We've just proved it with the people that you wrote down. Okay? Now some people argue with me, well, I wrote a parent down and that's kind of a position. I don't disagree with that, but it's not a title, right? They just happen to be the person that helped bring you into the world, okay? Or provided you some great guidance in your formative years. And so when you think about your calling as leaders in your practices, it's about how can you help your staff in their formative years to become leaders. That's where the influence really starts, okay? And so when we think about leadership, it's not about position, it's about the people. Now, I want you to indulge me here for a moment, okay? So let's say that someone is in front of you right now, and you're seated, or no, let's assume you're standing for a minute. They're seated, and they want to stand up. What are you going to do? You don't want them to stand up. What are you going to do? No, because they could still stand up. You don't want them to stand up. What are you going to do? Come on, parents, you've all had this with your kids. What do you do to them? Hold them down, right? So if I was, Carissa? Carissa. So if I wanted to keep Carissa from standing up, what am I going to do to her?
Push her back down in the chair.
Yeah, I've got to put my hands on her shoulders, right? I've got to hold her down. Now, if I just put my hands like this, can she stand up? Probably. I'm not that strong, right? So I've got to get behind her, and I probably have to physically do this, okay? Now, what did I just do by assuming that posture? This is authority? Me holding her down?
You're aggressive.
Aggressive. Now, I'm not the tallest guy, but there's a difference between this and this, right? I actually lower myself down to hold her down, okay? So think about that in terms of when you are working with someone and you are figuratively holding them back, okay? Not that any of you would do that, but think about it, has there been a point where maybe you've held someone back? We make ourselves smaller when we do that. Now take a look at these guys helping each other up the mountaintop here. If she was down on the ground and I wanted to help her up, I extend my hand, but I'm actually going to stand up really tall, right, to help her up off the ground. I actually make myself taller in assisting her. The same is very, very true of how we help people or hold people back with their development when we're responsible for them. I had a manager very early. I've been very fortunate. I've worked for some really good people, and I've worked for some really bad people. But the important thing is I've learned a lot of really cool lessons from both of them. And I remember one of my early managers said to me, Ed, don't give away too much of your knowledge because that knowledge is what makes you valuable. What do you think about that statement? Don't give away too much of your knowledge. That knowledge, you don't agree with that? Why not?
Not at all.
I mean, I think that the people that work for you, the smarter that they are and the more that they have, that makes you look better as a leader because if you can develop a strong team, that makes you more successful.
One would think so. You have anything to add to that?
It seems selfish.
His view was that if I develop you too much, I become less valuable to the company because I've shared my knowledge. Now, to a certain extent, there's some truth to that, right? Like if I hold on to my knowledge, I am super valuable right here where I am. And I may become so invaluable that I can't move anywhere else. The company can't let me go out of that position. So I've held myself back by not developing others. And even at the time, I mean, I was probably 23, 24 at the time I was working for this gentleman. And even then, being just a young guy and not really understanding leadership, I remember thinking that something fundamentally was wrong with that. Like, why would I develop all this knowledge and not want to share it with other people and try and develop other people? I don't understand that, okay? So I remember my early days, when I graduated college, I was working at UPS. And my first management role there, I was in operations, and I had a bunch of delivery drivers that reported to me that I dispatched and trained and that sort of thing. And of course, safety is big at UPS, as in so many organizations, but we would have to do annual rides with our drivers, safety checkups, where we watch them with their safe driving and their safe work habits, that sort of thing. And there was a gentleman in my work group who at the time had over 25 years of safe driving, no accidents, right? So the last time this guy had an accident, I wasn't even born yet. I mean, it's kind of crazy, right? And the guy was old enough to be my dad. And I'm thinking, what am I supposed to get on the truck and teach this guy, right? I mean, yeah, I've been through the UPS classes and all that stuff, but what am I really supposed to teach him? And so we had about a half-hour ride from the building out to his delivery area. And obviously I knew him, but we're talking and just kind of shooting the bull. And the guy's name was Mel, and I said, look, Mel, I got these checklists. You've been through this 100 times. I got these checklists I got to do. And I'm going to fill them out, and I'm going to worry about it at the end of the day. What I want to know from you is, how does a guy drive a truck 8-9 hours a day? I think he was at like 27 years, for 27 years, and not have an accident. That's what I want to understand today. And so by the end of the day, I understood where he was coming from, because my thought is, here's a really seasoned guy I can learn from, and now when I'm training new drivers, maybe there are some insights I can share. But here's where this story comes from an influence standpoint. So we really had worked on our relationship that day. It was a great day of bonding. So you got to remember now, this is almost 30 years ago. No cell phones. We had pagers, but the drivers didn't have pagers. So if you wanted to get a hold of a driver, a lot of times you would call a stop you knew, that a business that they hadn't been to yet, and say, hey, could you have the driver call in? Well, Mel, he delivered out in the boondocks, so there weren't a lot of places to call. But we had a day where a tractor trailer had broken down, and so we've got thousands upon thousands of packages sitting at a customer. And we were asking the guys in the brown delivery trucks when they were coming in, hey, look, unload some stuff. Can you go back out to this customer and make these pickups? Now, you have to remember, the UPS drivers are unionized. So guys high up in the pecking order can say, nope, give it to Joe. He's coming in later than me, okay? So it's kind of an all hands on deck trying to get these packages picked up. Mel gets in. It's a little bit after 5 o'clock. And I walk out to the truck. I said, Mel, would you do me a favor? Here's what we got going on. And he said, sure. He unloaded some packages. Out back he goes. And I came back into the office, and my manager said, Ed, what did you just do? I said, Mel out to help with those pickups. Now, Mel was about second or third highest seniority driver that we had. Fully within his rights to say, no, I'm checking out. You got plenty of guys coming in after me. And my manager said, what were you thinking? I don't know. We got a problem. Solving the problem. He's like, you don't ask a guy with that level of seniority to go out. I said, well, I did, and he agreed. Like, I was again, at 23, 24 years old, I'm like kind of clueless. Like, why is this a problem? In that manager's view, it was wrong of me to ask a favor of someone of that so-called stature, that seniority, right? And I looked and said, okay, I'm not going to go to that well all the time, but I felt like we had built a bond, and he was willing, though it was within his union rights to say no, to go and do me that favor. That's influence. Now, I didn't know it back then, okay? I'm not saying I was some child prodigy that I had leadership right from the start, no. But I share that story because how we treat people along the way is part of what develops our influence with them. And I know that's not rocket science. It's probably something they're going, yeah, duh, Ed, okay? But it's those little things. I liken it to, if you're a Pink Floyd fan, right? You got the brick on the wall. So every interaction you and I have is a chance to either put a brick on the wall between us or take one away. And when we think about our relationships, where are the walls between relationships that we have? And every time I interact, is it a chance to take a brick off the wall? Because if we keep adding them, sooner or later, there's nothing happening. We can't even see each other, much less communicate. And so when I think about leadership being about people, it's about that connection. Do we connect to our people? If you want a great read on the subject, there's a book called Hug Your People by a gentleman named Jack Mitchell. Now, it's a figurative hug, okay? Aside from pandemic, hugging all your people all the time can get you into other kinds of trouble, okay? But, and again, this book is so simple, but that's the beauty of this book, is its simplicity. This guy owns a chain of high-end clothing stores in Manhattan and up through Connecticut. And he motivates his people on a very individual level. Like, he knows stuff about each of his people. So he knows, you're the soccer dad who's always running kids to soccer, and he knows that daisies are your favorite flower, and so on, right? And so if he wants to do a little spot award, what do you think soccer dad's getting? What does a soccer dad need the most? If you've ever trekked kids to sporting events, what do they need? Or what do the parents need?
An SUV.
Well, okay, they probably have an SUV, so what do they need for that SUV? Gas, right? Maybe he gets $50 in gas cards or something, right? She likes daisies. Guess what shows up on her desk at her birthday? Daisies. It's those little things. So when we talk about how we recognize our people, and recognition has a huge part to play in developing influence, how often do we individualize even the little things that we do for our people? How much do you know about your people in order to be the leader that they need you to be? Not just from a, does he need a gas card and she need daisies, but what do they need in their job roles from you? That's the key. That's why leadership is all about people. So as we continue down this path, I want you to take a look at these methods of influence. So we've got, what, maybe half a dozen, 7 of them up there or so, from worst to best. I'm willing to bet if you look at this list, you can probably plug in there people that you've encountered, maybe even worked for, that have used various methods of influence as their primary go-to method of influence. Is that a safe statement? Hopefully there's not been too many people that have been up in here in force and intimidation. I will say back in my time at UPS, it was very much a Brown Army type thing. Like, there was a command and control, and this is how you did it. And it was a bit of a my way or the highway, depending on who you worked for. To a certain extent, still a little bit there, okay? Which of these on here do you think is the most common type of influence in the business world today in the U.S.? Think positional, okay? I wouldn't disagree with that. But the studies say it's intimidation, believe it or not. Now, if you're a Great Dane lover, you know they can be really nasty dogs, or they can be really nice dogs, right? Not just like everything else, right? So, this poor little Chihuahua or whatever he is here, these guys might be best buds. But when we look at this idea of my way or the highway, is there a time for that type of leadership? Please say yes. Yes. When is the time for my way or the highway kind of leadership?
When something has to be done.
Something has to be done, crisis mode, right? I'm making a decision, go. Don't have time for questions. Might be the wrong decision, but we've got to make one, let's move. Okay, so there are times where, although I would argue maybe that's not quite intimidation under that, that's a command and control type of situation, but there are times that it's my way or the highway. How many of you have ever been managed by someone who intimidated? A lot of us, right? What does the intimidator get out of the situation? They do, because they are positional in their thinking. They've got the little plaque on the desk that says the buck stops with me, and that means that I get to make the decisions. Maybe I'll listen to you, maybe I won't, but ultimately it's going to be done my way. What does that do to the workplace? Volatile? Yep. Kills morale. What else does it kill? What's the one thing you need your people to be every single day they show up? Productive and, I'm looking for the E word. Efficient, effective, that's all under productivity. Engaged. Engaged. Why should I be engaged if all you're going to do is intimidate? I'll keep my head down. I'll just do as you say because I'm just trying to get through the day. Can you survive with a disengaged workforce? Can't, right? And so what I ask you to think about is, I don't believe any of you are intimidators in here. Do you have any intimidators in your workforce? I see heads nodding. I was speaking at a couple years ago at one of the other AAOE chapters, and we weren't talking on this topic, but there was a CEO in the room, and he came up to me after and he said, "Ed, you and I have to talk." He said, "Something you said resonated with me," and we were talking about something called employment brand. In other words, you all have a marketing brand that you've tried to establish. You have an employment brand, whether you know it or not, that's on the street, right? And he said, there's something you said about our employment brand and how if we don't get it right, it's going to impact our marketing brand. And he said, I believe my HR function is actively harming my ability to run my practice. Ooh, well, that's not good, right? And so we had a meeting. This practice, well, I won't tell you where it was, large practice, 700 employees, doc-owned, and so this CEO reported to the docs that were on the board of directors, okay? And we started looking at some of the challenges in the practice. And what we were finding is that who was the problem? Now, they had other HR problems that we had to work on, but who were the intimidators in that practice? Who do you think? The doctors, okay? And so when I sat down with the docs as an ownership group, and it was not a formal presentation like this, but we talked about management styles. And to be quite honest, docs are usually really bad at management, okay? They're bad at running practices. That's why they need all of you. And so some of the guys were just totally like, they didn't want to hear what I had to say. Okay, great. But I found that the younger docs, those under, say, like 50 to be sure, and definitely those under 40, were starting to grasp this idea that, wait a minute, yes, my patients are coming here for me and what I can do to heal them, but they also see how I interact with my staff. And if I don't treat my nurses correctly, and if I don't treat my front desk, and everyone else properly, the 5 or 10 minutes that I've got in there with that patient really don't matter because it's all these other touch points. It's the physical therapist and so on that really make the patient experience. And so we had to do some work with those docs on recognizing their role in building their practices, not just about being the best orthopedic surgeons they can be, but in being the best leaders that they can be for their staff. That they were called as owners of the company to be leaders, not just all the folks that they had working for them like all of you, right? And so it was a huge turning point for them to think about this in this way. And they actually had a few docs leave the practice. They were getting ready to retire anyway, but there were a few cancerous docs in there that, I mean, you talk about dropping F-bombs and four-letter words and just, ranting and raving in the office, not in front of patients, okay? But that's toxic. But very much on my way or the highway. Now, when you're in the operating room and things are going crazy, who's in charge? The doc, and this is what I want done, is how I want it done, right? But that's in the operating room. Someone's open, they're laying there, got to do things a certain way, right? But in the normal course of business, totally different story. And so what was happening is folks were getting disengaged. This practice was looking to expand, open up another facility across town. They had their own surgical center. I mean, they were a one-stop shop. It was amazing the things they were doing, but they were in danger of not being able to open up this next facility in order to keep up with the competition because they couldn't recruit people to work there. Because the people that worked there weren't leaving because they paid them really well to put up with the crap, basically, okay? But they also weren't telling others to come work there. And online, their employment brand was in the toilet. And so that's the trickle-down effect with it all if we don't get this right. So, what I'm hoping for all of you is that not only do you work on this, but that you can go back and start influencing some of the docs. So the question you have to ask yourself is, why do you want to be an influencer? Think about that for a minute and jot it down. What's in it for you if you become a good influencer? Is it money, fortune, and fame? Is it a promotion, a raise? Is it satisfaction of a job well done? What is it that tells you, I realize I'm called to influence people? I was asked this question on a podcast the other day, and the person said, Ed, why do you talk about influence? And my roots are in the HR function. I've spent many years in HR. And I said, HR gets a bad reputation, in many cases deserved. For being just, stick in the mud, the paperwork pushers, not real problem solvers in organizations. And so when I first started talking about influence, I was sharing the story with HR folks. Like, you guys have to get on this boat. You can't be Toby from The Office. You can't be the doormat, okay? You think about how HR is portrayed in the media. It's always bad, always. And again, sometimes that's deserved. But I believe in influence, not just obviously for HR, but that was where, my first sharing of this story came about, was in that profession, because in many cases they're not influencers in their organizations. But we're all called to be. So here's the thing. Someone mentioned trust earlier, okay? Without trust, influence is coercion, okay? So the question is, how do we build trust? What do you guys know about building trust? How do you build it with someone? Okay, keep your word. We talked about that a little bit earlier. Absolutely. Whenever possible, stick to your promises. How else do you build trust? Okay, so an openness, sometimes we say, oh, that's an open door policy. Call it whatever you want, but I'm going to be there to help my people when they need me to be. That'll build trust, absolutely.
Be willing to do what you ask them to do.
Be willing to do what you ask them to do. Doesn't mean we have to do it all the time, right? But sometimes we got to go to the well. We've got to pitch in and do those things that maybe we did 20 years ago when we were climbing the ladder. But absolutely. So when we think about trust, it's key. It's key in every relationship that we have, right? Easy to break trust, though, right? And if we break it, maybe never get it back again. That's always a problem. Okay? So trust is at the center of everything. So when we think about it, look at this quote from Covey. You know, and in relation to trust and the speed of business today. You know, when I look at this quote, I would argue you're all trying to be high-performing, successful organizations, right? And so if we don't establish trust, not just with clients, as he says, but also with our employees, do our employees trust us? Do they trust their supervisor or their manager? Do they trust the vision that we have, that we're on the right path? That's a big question. I'm working with a client right now in the insurance industry that, by all accounts, they're in a really good place. They're growing like mad. Their core values are faith, love, and justice. They try to live those out. People feel like they can bring their entire selves to work. There's a lot of really good things going on. So why am I there? Because at the same time all these good things are going on, communication is really bad. They've changed CEOs after a 40-year CEO retired who was very pastoral in his leadership to a CEO who is very driven, numbers, results, and he's a good guy. He's not a slave driver by any means. He's a good guy, but totally different leadership style. And they're not feeling the trust just yet, and it's been 5 years. So how quickly can he build that trust in order to keep his company on track? Trust is critical in leadership. So here's the thing. If you want to know how to build trust with your people, here's what they want to know. The first thing they want to know about you as a leader is, can you help me? Can you help me? Probably in my career, right? Or with my challenges. And do you care about me as an individual? If we can't do those two things as leaders, I'd argue we probably don't belong in a leadership position. Like, that's what we're called to do, to care about our people and to help them. How do we show care and how do we show help to our people? By developing them, by being there for them, by showing care through our recognition of when they're doing a good job and how we handle them when they don't do the good job for us, that we show that same level of care. Those two things then, if we can master those, then they ask, can I trust you? But we can't build trust without the first two. So as a bit of homework, I'd like you to reflect on these three questions. If you asked each one of your people, do you think that I care about you? Do you think that I can help you? And finally, can you trust me? What would they say if they were being honest? Who do you need to work on those three questions with? It would be time well spent. And maybe, you know, it's a figurative asking of them. Maybe you know there are some relationships that you've got right now that aren't the greatest, and that's okay. We've all got to work on our relationship building. And maybe there are a couple people you've been struggling with. And maybe it's totally that other person's fault that we're having relationship problems with them. But we still have to come back to those three things if we want to be an effective leader for them. If we want to have influence over them, we want to have them moving towards our mission and our vision and on the bus going in the right direction, all those analogies, this is what they want to know. Until they can answer all of these things in the affirmative about you, they're not getting on the bus, okay? And if they're on the bus, they're looking out the window. That's it. And so this, to me, is the crux of building influence in our leadership abilities, is building in our people the knowledge that we care about them, that we want to help them, and that they can trust us to do those two things. Absolutely critical. I'm pretty sure that you're going to get the slides, right, Fraser? They can have access to the slides. So when you get the slides, circle this one. I mean, to me, this is where the magic is, right here. But it takes some inward looking and some honesty. Like I know, and I'll share one of my skeletons. When I get stressed, I tend to get a little snippy. I don't mean to do it. Someone can identify, okay?
I'm sure we all probably can.
And I've told my people, I know this about me, and I'm not making excuses. I'm working on it. But I'm telling you that you have the right to look at me and say, hey, Ed, stop it. You're going down the path. And they do. They look at me and say, yo, Ed, chill. And it's important for me that they trust me enough that I'm not going to jump all over them and say, well, who are you to tell me? And no, it's not my style, because it's a shortcoming that I know about me that I'm working on, okay? The ideal thing would be to just get stress out of the way, then I wouldn't have to get snippy, right? But, you know, it's a bit of that self-awareness. What are the things in us that we can work on that will help our people to know that we care about them? You know, is there something that we're doing that maybe is off-putting, and it's going to be hard to hear it, but do you have maybe that one trusted person on your staff that you could have that honest conversation, say, what's something I need to work on for the betterment of our relationship, for the betterment of my relationship with the rest of the staff? Hopefully you have someone you could have that conversation with. It would be critical to your development. Okay, we're winding down here. We've got a couple more things to talk about, and then I'm setting you free. So let's talk about how you increase your influence. You all have it, at least because of your positions right now and because of the way that you've shown your people so far. Let's talk about a couple things that we can do. I believe the biggest thing that we can do to add value to others, or excuse me, to increase our influence, is to add value to others. That comes back to developing them, okay? What resources are we giving them to be better in their roles? Sure, maybe you let them come to conferences like this. Great. But what else are we doing for them? Can they bring their entire self to work every day? Can they be who they are for you? That's a great question to ask yourself, okay? When I think about adding value to others, it means sharing our wisdom, sharing our dreams, our desires, helping them to meet their dreams for their careers. That's what adding value to others is. It's sharing what's inside us with them instead of holding it on like that manager of mine told me to do, of being that person who can be the wealth of information, or at least pointing them in the direction they need to be pointed to in order to get the information and the development that they need if you can't get it in-house. But what opportunities are you presenting to your people to develop themselves? That's your second piece of homework, because that's how you're going to increase your influence with them, is your ability to develop them. So, whenever you have a situation, whether it goes well or not in an interaction, I do this all the time. Maybe you had an interaction that went really well. I still ask myself, why did it go so well? Could it have gone better? And what would I do differently about it? What's the power in asking these three questions to yourself every day? What's the power in this slide?
You learn from your experience.
Okay? Learning from our experiences. Okay? It's absolutely critical. We make mistakes every day, all of us, right? So the question is, if I can ask myself, well, why did I make that mistake? What was the decision that I made that led to that? And can we own up to that mistake with our people? Yep, I blew it that time, right? Do our people know that we blew it that time? Yeah, they do. So what's the harm in saying, yeah, I blew it that time? They know. Good leaders are okay. They're comfortable saying, yeah, gang, I blew it. And I've thought about it. Here's what I would do differently. And are willing to have that open conversation. You talk about building trust with your team, owning up to your shortcomings is a huge piece of that. Now, what about the flip side? What about when something has gone well? Why would you ask yourself these questions if something just went really well?
So you can do it great next time?
Okay, maybe we can improve upon it next time, make it even better. Jeff, you were kind of...
Just repeat the process.
Repeat the process, right? How do I learn and say, okay, what decisions did I make that led us down this path that worked out so well, and how can I replicate those things? Huge. And then how do I share that with my people? Kind of like the story that I shared with me going out with the driver, right? I wanted to know what was going so right for him out there that he could have 27 years of safe driving so that I could share it with other people, okay? So that wasn't me being influential. That was that driver being influential, right? In sharing his knowledge with me so I could pass it on to others. These 3 questions, I'd put an asterisk next to this too when you get your slides. Absolutely critical that we get this. I'm telling you, it has made a huge difference in my professional life and my personal life. When I look at, either in the morning or the evening, what was good about today? What went well? What didn't? How can I fix it? What would I do differently? I use this a lot after I've had maybe a call with a prospective client. How did that go? Or maybe it's a report back to an executive team. How did that go, and what would I do differently? Instead, just, oh yeah, that went good, off I go, on to the next thing. It's been a huge help for me in becoming more influential. And so I want to start to wrap up here with this idea that we started off talking about self-leadership. If we can lead ourselves well, if we can think about those 3 things that our people need, do we care about them? Can they trust us? Can we help them? If we can ask ourselves those reflective questions, then we're on the path to leading ourselves well. And when we lead ourselves well, that's when people start to follow us. Even warts and all, they know we're not perfect. We're not talking in here about being perfect. We're talking about being genuine. And people are going to follow you if they know you're genuine, because through that genuineness is where the trust comes in. And so I want to end on 2 thoughts here. First thought, it's the key to your growth. Mastering influence is the absolute key to your growth. And I don't know that this is a destination so much as it is a journey. I think that mastering our ability to influence, mastering our leadership is just, we're on the continuum. We're always learning. People say, well, Ed, you must be a great leader. You talk about this. I don't know if I'm a great leader or not. I just know I'm on the journey, right? And I'm trying to share some of the things that I'm learning along the way with other people. And so I don't know that there will be a point where someone's going to say, oh yeah, that person's a great leader and they've mastered everything. I don't know. Maybe there is someone that meets that bill out there. But I think this is a key thing. The concepts that we've talked about today, if you can master them, you will be amazed at what your position and your influence will look like a year from now. I guarantee that. Now, I want to end with a quote from Jackie Robinson. You guys know all Jackie Robinson, right? He said something to the effect of, a life isn't worth living except for the significance it's had on other lives. I love that quote. That's what we're called to be as leaders. We're called to be significant for other people. So how can you be significant? That's what I'd like to end with. How can you be significant? I want to thank you for the opportunity to come and chat with all of you and for your willingness to chat with me. And I hope you all have safe travels home.